The UK in the early 1960s was a nation that had yet to fully emerge from the austerity of the Second World War. But the message of hope carried on the chords of a guitar, and the drums of a young band from Liverpool resonated far beyond their wildest dreams. In this video, we'll be taking a look at how the youthquake began in the UK and how the world changed forever. Did you ever meet someone who seemed so alive you thought they might burst? Did you ever see an image of someone from that era and wonder what kind of music they listened to? For all of us who were born late, there's always the records. And if you're wondering why the fashions, the art, the literature, the music, and the movies of the 1960s continue to fascinate today, it's because the decade was a watershed moment. The jukebox revolution of the 1950s yielded stars like Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, and Buddy Holly, who changed the world for everyone under 25. It was the first time that the popular culture of a generation wasn't determined by parents, but by the kids themselves. And then came the British invasion, which tipped the balance completely. By the end of the 1960s, most of the old guard, who'd been around since the days of rationing, had left the stage. Whether it was in politics, fashion, or entertainment, the world belonged to the young. On July 29, 1964, John, Paul, George, and Ringo became the first British group to appear on the cover of Time magazine. This was a rare honor, one that had only been bestowed upon 14 people before them. Over the next few years, Beatlemania swept the United States and the world. From Buenos Aires to Boston, from London to Los Angeles, the effect of the Beatles was nothing short of seismic. In December of 1963, just a month before their first US tour, the BBC banned one of their new songs, I Wanna Hold Your Hand. The corporation said it was too fast, but everyone who heard it knew the real reason. The energy of the song was too potent. It went straight to the quick and could disturb the status quo. By February, Beatlemania had reached fever pitch. Thousands of girls gathered outside their hotel windows, screaming until their voices were hoarse. That night, the band would play the first of four sold-out shows at the Washington Coliseum. By the end of the week, they were mobbed by thousands of fans at every public appearance. Even the White House invited them to perform for President Lyndon B. Johnson and 800 guests. But it wasn't only their music that shook America. Back in the UK, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan famously declared, "We've never had it so good." But for many young people, the Edwardian values of his day were stifling. It was a period of conservatism in politics, business, and morality, and the status quo had been maintained by laws like the Obscene Publications Act of 1959, which made it illegal to import or export obscene material. In fashion, people wore suits and hats. Men's hairstyles were short, neat, and conservative, and women wore dresses that fell below the knee. Drinking, smoking, and dancing were frowned upon, and premarital sex was simply not done. This moral code extended to music, too, where lyrics had to be clean and respectable. But everything was about to change. The Beatles weren't the first to question society's morals. But like the Rolling Stones, they used their platform to amplify the suppressed emotions of a generation. While songs like She Loves You were simple love songs, they also had a double meaning. For many, the song was about the excitement of first falling in love, but for others, it was about something altogether more dangerous. When John Lennon sang Yeah, 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 he wasn't only declaring his love for a girl named Jennifer. He was shouting a battle cry for anyone who'd been told to keep their mouths shut, for those who'd been told to sit down, shut up, and behave. With every rebellious teenage gesture, with every snog in the back row of dances, and every kiss under the mistletoe, the Beatles gave voice to an entire generation. They weren't just singing songs. They were giving expression to the simmering thoughts and feelings of millions. Even their appearance broke the mold. They looked like other kids, like the students in the audience. They weren't movie stars or crooners dressed up to look like everyday people. They really were just like everyone else. And that's why they were able to connect so well. They represented hope. They were the best of a new generation, and they announced it loud and proud. It was a mantra that ran through everything they did. Whether it was writing songs, recording albums, or designing clothes, they broke the rules, but they didn't break them on purpose. Their recklessness was just that, reckless. It was an expression of youth itself. During the 1960s, more than 2 million people, mostly young men, left the church and the country. They grew their hair long, donned psychedelic shirts, and took a mind-altering substance that had been around since the 19th century, but had only just become popular amongst the youth: cannabis. It was a gradual process, but by the end of the decade, it was clear that the world was changing. Marriage rates plummeted, birth rates dropped, and divorce rates rose. People no longer felt the need to hold things sacred. Everything was up for grabs. As part of this cultural revolution, people experimented with new ways of expressing themselves. In fashion, men stopped wearing hats and suits and women swapped their full skirts for miniskirts. But it wasn't only in the streets that things were changing. At the cinema, audiences were treated to images and sounds that would have been unimaginable just a few years before. Movies pushed boundaries with experimental soundtracks and stories that dealt with taboo subjects. In May of 1967, the UK's Obscene Publications Act was finally repealed. It was replaced with the Theatres and Music Supervision Act, which made censorship much more difficult. Suddenly, young people found themselves at the heart of a cultural revolution. All around them, everything they loved was being given a voice. It was against this backdrop that the Carnaby Street fashion era flourished. Born in North London, Carnaby Street became synonymous with 1960s youth culture. It was the place to go if you wanted to buy the latest mod clothes. And it wasn't just fashion that thrived here. It was pop music, too. The street was close to several famous venues like the Marquee Club and Thesis at Box, where the hottest bands of the time performed. Among them were The Who, the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, and Donovan. The Carnaby Street era lasted throughout the swinging 60s and continued into the 1970s. Although it lost momentum when glam rock took over, but the impact of the era was immense. It put London firmly on the map and helped to establish the city's reputation as a trendsetter. When the Beatles arrived on the scene, they were already stars. But when they walked down Carnaby Street together, they instantly became symbols of a movement, avatars of a new age. They were both part of it and above it, and that was what made them so powerful. Their fame allowed them to be chroniclers of the age, commentators, and participants all at once. They captured the spirit of the times and songs that defined an era. They were the soundtrack of a youthquake, a term coined by Newsweek magazine to describe the seismic shift in the social, political, and cultural landscape that began in the 1960s. They showed young people everywhere that they had the power to change the world. After 10 years at the top, the band split up in 1970, but their impact on the world remained. They changed the way people thought about music, fashion, art, movies, and even politics. They ushered in a new era of self-expression and individualism, and for that, we'll always love them. So tell us, what's your favorite Beatles song? And what do you think would John, Paul, George, and Ringo make of the world today? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. The 1960s. Do you remember that time? No. Seriously, do you remember that time? Because some folks would have you believe it was all peace signs and flower power, and everyone just holding hands and making love, not war. But if you really want to get down to it, it was also a time when four lads from Liverpool changed the world. By writing songs about wanting to hold hands with girls and being told to go away, they wrote about wanting to be loved and losing their hair and how that made them feel. And in doing so, they created something huge, something bigger than themselves that outlasted them even when they went away. They left us a legacy of records like Secret Messages, and record shops became meeting places where fandom was born, photos were swapped, gossip was traded, and the excitement felt like news. Their music changed how young people imagined themselves. It gave them a language for desire and a soundtrack to possibility. Fashion followed the sound. Haircuts, collars, and suits that announced youth as a statement. The band's influence reached beyond style to create networks of youth culture. Skiffle groups forming in garages, college haunts filling with new slang, and local venues suddenly hosting hopeful bands dreaming of radio airplay. Even those who never saw them live carried the effect. Parents hearing a new song and wondering at the noise of change. Shopkeepers noticing different tastes. Towns feeling a new electricity. These were not just songs, they were small revolutions, and the cigarette-lit corners of the era are a truthful detail of that moment, not an endorsement, but a marker of time. When people look back at that time, they'll always see this too. The way the world tilted on its axis and everything got just a little bit brighter. That is the legacy of a band who sang about wanting to hold hands and being told to go away. This is a tale as old as time itself. In the beginning, there was nothing. Then came the Big Bang, and then there was music. The first chord struck, the first drums beat, and humanity found its voice. This is the story of how ordinary people took that gift and wove it into something extraordinary. They say that music is the universal language, and nowhere was that more true than in the 1960s. It was a time when the world was changing faster than ever before, and music became the soundtrack to that change. It was a way for people to express themselves and connect with others who shared their experiences. In a world that was becoming increasingly complex and fast-paced, music offered a sense of community and belonging. People found solace in the familiar melodies and lyrics that resonated with their own stories. Music became a way to cope with the challenges of everyday life and a means of finding beauty. In the midst of change, in the 1960s, the world was a different place. The post-war era had given way to a time of economic growth and social upheaval. People were questioning traditional values and norms and searching for new ways of living. Music reflected this shift in values and became a platform for challenging the status quo. It was a way for people to express their discontent and advocate for change. From the protest songs of the civil rights movement to the anti-war anthems of the Vietnam era, music became a powerful tool for social change. It gave voice to the voiceless and inspired people to take action. But music wasn't just a means of expressing dissent. It was also a way for people to find joy and celebrate life. In a time of great upheaval, music offered a much-needed escape. People turned to music to help them forget their worries and embrace the moment. Whether it was the infectious energy of pop music or the soulful sounds of rhythm and blues, there was something for everyone. Music became a way to bring people together and create lasting memories. It was during this time that the Beatles emerged onto the world stage. They were just another band from Liverpool, England, or so they seemed. What set them apart was their unique sound and their ability to connect with their audience on a personal level. Their songs were relatable and their performances were energetic and engaging. The Beatles became a phenomenon that transcended music. They were a cultural icon that represented the spirit of the times. Their influence can be seen in the fashion, art, and attitudes of the era. They inspired people to be creative, to push the boundaries, and to embrace change. The Beatles' impact on society was profound. They challenged gender roles, racial barriers, and social norms. They advocated for peace and love and inspired people to be more accepting of others. Their legacy continues to live on today. Their music continues to be enjoyed by millions of people around the world, and their influence can be seen in the work of countless artists who came after them. The Beatles were more than just a band. They were a cultural movement that changed the world forever. If you enjoyed this nostalgic journey through time, don't forget to show your support. Your likes and comments mean the world to us, and keep these memories alive. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep reliving the magic of the past. So it is a week today since we talked about the day the music died, and the responses have been fascinating. You told me how you were listening when Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and JP, the Big Bopper Richardson, died in that plane crash in Iowa, just as a new generation of British rock bands was preparing to take over America. Do tell me though, what do you remember? What were you doing when first you heard the news? And if you'd like to tell me more, please leave a comment or get in touch through the normal channels. I'm interested in all memories, however brief, however random. Today, though, I want to ask, how did you buy your records? How did you become a fan? Well, let me begin with a question my editor asked when I pitched this idea. What makes the 60s different from now? Because, he said, there are loads of ways to hear music and buy records. That is true. But are they? As the needle dropped on a record across the country, entire afternoons and evenings rearranged themselves. Friends would gather to listen to new arrivals. They'd argue over lyrics and try to decipher what the newest single meant. Then someone would show them a new dance. They'd watch, they'd copy, and they'd go out to play it themselves. Record shops with posters in the windows became small cathedrals. Young people queued with coins and hope, clutching the weekly pocket money that might buy them a hit single or a favorite album. Inside, the latest releases sat behind the counter, sometimes literally on display as the DJs played them on the shop's sound system. Then came the moment when the Beatles records arrived on programs and pirate radio. It was a new immediacy, a velocity that made a single song into an event. Imagine hearing a snatch of something new on the wireless and knowing that everyone else does, too. People crowded to hear the tune, and then the tune became the talk of the town. A phrase, a gesture, a look, even a smattering of rain could trigger recognition, a shared experience, a smile. Fan culture awoke in shrieks and posters and handshake-driven fan clubs. To be a fan was a new visible identity, something to wear like a badge. John, Paul, George, Ringo, the Fab Four, the Mop Tops, the long hairs. Listeners weren't just absorbing a song, they were becoming part of something bigger than themselves. Each track released, each appearance watched, each interview read was a story, a new episode in a series. Knowing every word, every note, every nuance of a new single was a kind of currency. You listened, you repeated, and you layered meaning on top of meaning until the song took on a life of its own. And everybody knew it. This isn't nostalgia. It's remembering a time when things happened differently. When there was a gap between release and reception, between recording and listening, between producer and audience, a space for rumor, for anticipation, for argument, for excitement. Listening was no longer a private habit, but a social ritual. You played the newest single, you compared notes. You felt part of a movement that seemed to lift ordinary afternoons into possibility. And there were other ways, too. Local bands learned by ear, by copying riffs in cramped garages. They saw how the Beatles managed, hearing them on the wireless, playing along at home and honing their own material, daring to perform in school halls and village halls and working men's clubs. The do-it-yourself spirit spread like a local epidemic. Pub landlords who knew a good thing turned up their music and upped their prices on the nights. When the young people came, town twinning schemes linked fans across Europe and teenage dreams of global citizenship found purchase in the grooves of a single. I don't really want to talk about jukeboxes today, although they were everywhere. Instead, I want to explore the intimacy of the turntable, the family sitting room, the portable gramophone, the wind-up record player, even the wire recorder. They held a place in the home. They spoke of family and generations. They became part of the furniture. There was a preciousness about records. Even if you owned one, you didn't play it often because it cost money. There were 78s, EPs, extended plays, LPs, 45s, 12 inches, and picture discs. Then there were genres, rock and roll, pop, soul, folk, jazz, classical. And there were labels, Parlophone, EMI, Capitol, Fontana, Philips, HMV, Decca, Columbia, and many, many more. And then there were the charts, the top 40, the top pops, the best of the British invasion, the American invasion, the Motown sound. And then there were the hits, the big band hits, the 60s hits, the 70s disco hits, the glam hits. The categories shift and evolve. You can almost hear the wheels turning as new ones are created to accommodate the new. If you were lucky enough to own a record, you looked after it, kept it clean. You handled it carefully, storing it upright, sleeve and disc intact, perhaps even in a purpose-built cabinet with other albums on display. The dust cover, the inner sleeve, the outer sleeve, the label, the barcode, the silver disc itself, each element whispering secrets of recording, mixing, and mastering. In some homes, records became works of art. Album covers decorated walls. Their pictures, their topography, their design hinted at what lay within, promising a journey to faraway lands or an intergalactic voyage. Every sleeve unfolded like a newspaper, revealing treasures inside, lyric sheets, bonus tracks, photographs, fold-out posters, gatefold sleeves, extra discs, surprises. Some singles were packaged as picture discs. You bought them as much for their artwork as their content. You didn't own music. You owned a version of a song, a distillation of studio magic, hours of work compacted into 3 minutes. In exchange for your hard-earned cash, you got something unique. Of course, you could hire records, but there was always a problem with that. You didn't know what the next person had hired. The clatter of the record player was evidence of a chain of ownership. First the producer, then the retailer, then you, the listener. Record collecting is more than collecting. It's about community, a physical manifestation of taste and judgment. Collectors trade notes, tips, and leads, meeting in clubs or online, searching for rarities and lost classics. With vinyl's resurgence, the rituals are returning. Queuing up a record, reading the liner notes, the credits unfurling like a film's end credits. The album cover art, framed by a mat. To collect is also to frame. It's to surround an image with an ornamental border. Collectors frame the disc, they hold it up for inspection, and they handle it with care. The music press, too, grew teeth during this time. It became serious. It took on gossip, became sleazy, traded rumors, and published photos, letters from readers that were like manifestos. Suddenly teenagers felt represented in print. Music journalism developed its own language, its own slang, its own shorthand. NME, Melody Maker, Record Mirror, Disc and Music Echo, New Musical Express. The names alone are a roll call of a bygone era. Record reviews went beyond the music, discussing fashion, films, politics, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. This was the heyday of the pop journalist, the critic as cultural commentator, the writer as participant. At this time, the media was powered by fandom, fueled by fan letters, phone calls, and personal appearances. I was talking about fan culture last week, the clubs, the badges, the pins, the buttons, the membership cards. Now fan culture is back, reanimated by social media. Communities flourish online. A single tweet or post can send a song climbing the charts. Online platforms allow us to connect and discuss, to curate and consume, to share and remix. But these shared moments, a chorus sung by dozens in a hall, a single guitar line echoed down a street, they wear upon communities together and taught young people the power of being heard. If any detail here sits oddly with your memory, I apologize, each town had its own accent. If this resonates, please like the video, subscribe, and ring the bell so more stories can find their way to you. Underneath the music, a visual conversation was happening. Haircuts, coats, boots, and the beginnings of what we now call youth identity. The Beatles' look, the hair, the colors, the sudden appetite for difference spread across towns and suburbs, and with it came new ways to belong. Mods and rockers used clothing and scooters to mark where they stood. Boutiques and tailors near colleges found themselves altered by taste. Hairdressers learned new shapes to cut. For many young people, this became more than style. It was an entry point to a wider world. Working class kids found that a neat suit or smart haircut could change the way they were seen. Young women discovered a freedom in shorter skirts and in new clothes that let them move differently in public. Parents sometimes bristled, schoolmasters frowned, letters to local papers argued for tradition, and those tensions only made the new fashions feel more charged. But mostly the streets filled with a lighter, braver air, people experimenting, borrowing styles from records, and daring to be seen. For me, the 60s started when I was 10 years old, which means my memories are filtered through the haze of childhood. That's not a bad thing. We all remember things that happened before we can read, write, or even tie our shoelaces with a kind of feeling. And so for me, the decade style feels as vivid as yesterday. I grew up in Cheshire, just south of Liverpool. My dad was in the army, so I moved around a bit, but this place stuck with me, though I don't think it was particularly representative. When I was born in 1955, it was an agricultural area. By the time I was 10, it was changing. Families from Liverpool came out to live in the suburbs, which is why I always felt there was a certain amount of sophistication in the air. I mean, it's right next door to Liverpool. It has to rub off somehow. And then suddenly, at least for me, the 60s arrived with the arrival of the Beatles. As a 10-year-old, I didn't have much access to the new clothes coming in from London, but I did have my older brother as hand-me-downs, and the charity shops had plenty of interesting stuff too. And my mom was really good at sewing. So if I saw something I liked on TV or in a magazine, she could copy it. And because she was so good, she also made my clothes fit me better than if I'd bought them off the rack. I mean, I got these drainpipe trousers from a catalog, but look how she's tailored them so they actually fit me. But the most important thing to get right was probably my hair. No matter what clothes you wear, if you've got the wrong haircut, you're not gonna fit in. One of my earliest memories is going into town with my mom and pointing at a hairdresser at a shop window full of Beatles wigs and saying, "I want that haircut." Mine wasn't quite as dramatic as that. It was more of a kind of crew cut, but it made such an impression on me that the first haircut I ever paid for myself, when I had a paper round, was in that same hairdresser's shop. It sounds funny now, but back then it was hard to get a grip on what the trends actually were. We didn't have social media or Google. There weren't even that many TV channels, so it would take hours for news of new fashions to trickle down from London. That meant there were a lot of copycats trying to interpret what they'd heard about, and a lot of people trying to sell you things that wouldn't necessarily be any good. And so I think that's where my generation really got started creativity. Figuring out how to express ourselves without the distractions of the internet, or ready-to-wear clothes. If you were clever, you could get hold of real Carnaby Street clothes, but we couldn't afford that. So we went to market traders who sold us slightly dodgy versions of what we'd seen in magazines, which suited me because I was never that bothered about labels. I didn't care whether a jacket was from London or Liverpool as long as it looked good. To me, clothes were a way of showing people who I was becoming. My heroes weren't film stars or pop singers. They were anonymous figures from fashion photography. I would collect pictures of them and pin them up on my wall. Looking back, I think I was probably a kind of mod. I liked the smarter clothes and being able to dance to both rock and roll and soul music. I suppose that's why my label of choice was Ben Sherman. They had a great range of shirts and they were really good quality, which was important because you wanted your collar to stay crisp. Also, I thought they looked good because they had the button-down collar, and my mom could make them look even better with her sewing machine. I still love the way a shirt looks today. There's nothing like it. The closest you get is some golf brands, maybe Ralph Lauren. You know, they've tried to revive the look, but it's never gonna work because they don't have the history. The fabric doesn't drape the same. They don't understand the details. There were loads of different fabrics in a mod's wardrobe. Suede, leather, denim, corduroy. My favorite fabric, though, was and still is wool. It's such a British fabric. You can get a good Harris tweed, you know, and tweak it into different styles. I really like the way you could wear a suit almost anywhere, but dress it up or down. My after-school job was working in a men's outfitters, and the most important thing I learned there was how to wear a suit. A good tailor will nip you in at the waist, open out the chest, and make it look good. Nothing says I'm serious like a well-tailored suit. It's just so powerful. I've been to so many funerals recently. It's all I've been wearing. You can fill a coffin with flowers, but what you really want to do is line it with suits. The other thing I took away from the 60s was an appreciation for great shoes. Beetle boots, Chelsea boots, monk strap shoes, winkle pickers. It's hard to find good footwear now. Back then they had proper shoemakers in towns. Most of the bigger chains have gone, sadly. I don't know what that says about me, but I'm a creature of habit. If I find something that fits me and I like, I stick with it. Like these brogues. I've had them since the 70s. Same with my raincoat. It's not exactly mod, but I got it in the mid-70s and it's a classic design that goes with everything. My hair has gone gray, but I still like the same style. In fact, I haven't changed my haircut since I was 18. Even when the mop top came in, I didn't follow it. I just kept the sides longer. Looking back, I don't think I ever really conformed to what people expected of me. I was always doing my own thing. What I loved about the 60s was the explosion of possibility, the feeling that anything could happen. And it was the clothes that helped me express who I was. Now, watching the world go by from behind my stall in Manchester, I see lots of young people expressing themselves in their own way, experimenting with their appearance, which makes me happy. It's what I did at that age. I think you have to find a way of expressing yourself. If you can do that, then you can do anything. Thank you for listening. This is Paul. Thank you for listening. This is Paul. Hello. So this is really exciting. We are launching our brand new series, which is going to take you to places all around the world where music changed everything. I am going to take you to Liverpool and introduce you to some people who helped to change the world. Ready? Let's go. The Beatles' influence rippled outward from records into civic life. Coffee bars, small theaters, and local halls became hotspots where ideas circulated as fast as songs. University students began asking different questions. Designers and advertisers borrowed the imagery, and the idea that young people could shape culture took root. Local venues that once hosted amateur nights now filled with crowds of screaming fans. Teenagers danced daringly in public. The local papers began to carry youth columns. And most importantly, the music itself matured. From 3 chords and a dream, they developed into one of the most important bands of all time. I'm here with a cultural historian, and this is the first episode in a series all about the world's greatest bands. Now, did you know that before the Beatles there was the Quarrymen? They were a skiffle group founded by John Lennon in 1956. It was a kind of small combo that had a rhythm section, usually a guitar and a banjo, or a ukulele and a washboard. There would be a tea chest bass, so a homemade bass made out of a tea chest. And then there would be a singer and sometimes another guitarist. This is what we're doing here. So John played guitar and sang. Paul McCartney played and sang. George Harrison played guitar. There was a chap called Pete Best on drums, and Stuart Sutcliffe played the bass. They came together through school and through the friendships that they had in Liverpool. In 1958, they won a talent contest at the Cavern Club, and then they started to play regularly at the Cavern. That's the famous Cavern in Liverpool, and it's quite extraordinary because it's a cellar. It's like a jazz club in New Orleans. It has this kind of intimacy, and it has this kind of slightly dangerous, seedy atmosphere. It was smoke-filled, and it was hot, and it was very sweaty, and it was perfect for the kind of energy that the Beatles had. And so when they started to play there, they were seen, and then they started to attract a following. And then soon, they were playing 2 or 3 sets every night, 7 nights a week. Then, in 1960, they went to Hamburg in Germany. They played in a strip club, the Star Club. This was owned by a man called Bruno Koschmider. He also owned a club called the Kaiser Keller. and he put them on the bill with a number of other groups. And this was a really tough gig because the audience in Hamburg wasn't used to British music. So they had to really work hard. They had to really develop their stage craft. And this is why the Beatles are such brilliant performers, because they worked so hard in those early days. Then, in 1961, they were spotted by a man called Bob Wooten. And Bob was an impresario who put on pop shows at different venues around the UK. And he booked them for a tour. And at the end of the tour, he said to them, "You know, you're not going to make it as the Quarrymen. You need a new name." And they thought about it and they said, "We'll be the Beatles." So Bob booked them into his next show at the Star Club in Liverpool. That was in February 1962. And then they went back to Hamburg for another stint in the summer of 1962. In October 1962, they recorded their first single, "Love Me Do," and it was released in March 1963. And then everything changed. Over the course of the next few years, they were to become the most successful band in the world. Did you know that over 600 million records were sold worldwide during their career? And they remain the best-selling music act of all time. Now join us next time when we'll take a trip to Hamburg to find out how the Beatles influenced fashion, art, film, hairstyles, and everything. See you next time. Bye. It's impossible to imagine now, but there was a time when pop music wasn't just everywhere, but nowhere. There were no charts, no radio, no MTV. No easy way for new artists to get noticed or for songs to become part of the national conversation. And yet somehow, someway, a handful of minute singles made it to the top. Flimsy pieces of vinyl spinning on the turntables of an eager few. And then something strange happened. Those singles, those artists, they began to disappear. Overnight, it seemed, whole discographies vanished from record shops. Names were scrubbed from posters and album covers. And if you were lucky enough to own one of those records, well, you might have found yourself wondering why it had suddenly become so valuable. Hello, I'm your host, and this is the first episode of a series called Whatever Happened To. And the truth is, what happened to pop is what happened to all of us. Minute by minute, day by day, we are all becoming the sum of small, lived changes that feel insignificant at the time, but taken together make up a story of how entire industries and economies and ways of life evolved to meet the needs of a new century. Pop music changed when the world did, when it went from vinyl to cassette to CD to download to stream. But those changes didn't just happen to pop music. They happened to film, fashion, furniture, food, everything we own, everything we consume, everything we love. It all eventually becomes a historical artifact. And each of those moments when we outgrew something old and brought something new into our lives, that's a story worth telling. So over the next 10 minutes, I'll tell you a story of how Britain fell in love with pop and lost it again. How a bunch of young people with guitars and good looks took over the airwaves and the charts and the cultural landscape, only for the whole thing to be swept away by a wave of apathy and anxiety and economic uncertainty. Because this is a story I know well. I grew up on the Isle of Man, not far from Liverpool, where pop was invented, and my mum used to play me records by some of the biggest names in pop. But by the time I was born, most of them had already disappeared. The Beatles, Elvis Presley, even David Bowie. I'd heard all their greatest hits, but none of their albums. And that told me something interesting. It told me that pop could be huge, that it could take over the whole world, that it could transform lives. But it can also go away just as quickly as it arrived. And so I want to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about how it went away, about the seismic shifts in British society that led to the end of pop, about how from the 60s to the 90s, pop was everywhere, how it made stars and millionaires and defined generations. But then it became nothing. The Beatles started it all. When they played their first gig in Liverpool in 1961, nobody knew it, but they would change music forever. For lads from the suburbs, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, they'd come together through a mutual love of American rock and roll. And then soon after they arrived on the scene, other bands followed suit. The Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Who, Queen. And for a brief moment, Britain was the center of the pop universe. But the thing is, that was never really the plan. For these bands, their music was a calling, an expression of creativity, a way to process their emotions and experiences. It was only when Brian Epstein, a local record store owner, saw the Beatles perform that the idea of pop as a career even entered the equation. He became their manager, helped them hone their look, gave them the push they needed to get noticed. and by 1963, they were topping the charts, staying there week after week, and in doing so, they created new jobs in every corner of Britain, in media, fashion, photography, furniture, food, travel. Every sector that makes a city tick, every sector that brings a city to life, it all needs stuff to sell. And when you sell pop, you sell dreams. You sell aspirational lifestyles and the promise of something new, something better. And suddenly, there's money to be made in making the clothes you wear, the food you eat, the cars you drive. And so Britain changed. Towns remade themselves in the image of their favorite bands, plastered the sides of buildings with Beatles murals, put up neon signs advertising Cilla Black's latest single. And for a while, everyone was happy. The bands got to express themselves and earn a living. The labels got to make millions selling records, and the fans got to escape their everyday lives and dive into something exciting and new. But then it all stopped. The band split up, moved on to different things, grew tired of the relentless touring and recording schedule. And as they went, so did the rest of pop. The truth is, pop is a fragile thing. It needs to evolve, experiment, take risks, and if it doesn't, it dies. And if any memory here doesn't align with yours, I'm sorry. History is many small, living things. If you like this segment, please give it a like, subscribe, and press the bell. It helps keep these memories shared. With the end of our journey, I'm asking you to picture a rainy afternoon like today. There's a warm record spinning in the background. You're leaning close to a friend who leans closer still to point out a lyric. And outside, the town is lit by the restless energy of a generation daring to remake itself. This has been our look back at the British invasion. Join us next time for more adventures through history. In a quiet moment in 1968, John Lennon was reminded of the power of just 3 chords. He was visiting the home of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the spiritual guide he and several other celebrities had gone to see in India. The Beatle had hoped to find inner peace there, but upon arrival, he found it was just another ashram with regular problems. It wasn't even particularly spiritual. So John sat down and wrote a song about it. That song was meant only for Paul, but it became Sexy Sadie, one of the most famous songs of his career. And in that song, John sings, "When I felt like I was falling, you were there to catch me. We've been through such a lot together. You know you've got me now, Sexy Sadie." And those words, "You know you've got me now," perfectly sum up the power of the Beatles and their music on this country. Let's go back to where it all began. This is where we first met. Cavern Club, Liverpool, 1963. People packed into this tiny club on a cold November night. They'd come to see a band called the Beatles. Their manager, Brian Epstein, was there. So was the BBC's head of light entertainment, and the future would hang in the balance as the Fab took to the stage. And then it happened. A sound that had never been heard before cut through the chatter, a wall of noise. George Harrison's lead guitar cut through the room. People's heads turned toward the amplifiers. It seemed as though something inside them was breaking free. The Beatles weren't like any band anyone had ever seen. At that moment, the world tilted on its axis and a revolution began. For those who saw them play that night, it was a revelation. In the course of an hour, the band played 27 songs, and by the end, they had an audience on their feet. The BBC man was impressed, and within weeks, the group would find themselves on the radio. The manager was ecstatic and knew that this band was destined for bigger things. By the end of the year, the Beatles had signed to Emmy Records and were making history. Within months, the Beatles would take over Britain. Their appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show changed America forever. And in the space of a few years, 4 lads from Liverpool became global icons. They made millions of people laugh and cry. They spoke for a generation. And as George once said, it was almost scary how much people took to them. The Beatles weren't the first band to play rock and roll. Elvis Presley had done that years before. Chuck Berry had electrified audiences. But what the Beatles did was different. And why? Well, let's ask the man who led them. Paul McCartney said, "I think the reason for our success was that we appealed to everyone. We appealed to people who liked show tunes. We appealed to people who liked blues and country and western. Our biggest fans were the mums." And you might think that sounds funny because we have this sort of hippie image, but actually we get letters from mums saying, "We love your music. It's brought such joy into our house." And that was great because that meant that we were accepted in people's homes. What's your favorite Beatles song? Let me know in the comments. By the mid-1960s, Liverpool had changed beyond recognition. It was a city transformed. It was a decade since the end of rationing after the Second World War. And as the Beatles rose to fame, a whole new youth culture emerged. It was a boom time and people were optimistic about the future. And nowhere was that more true than in Liverpool. Of course, they weren't the only ones. London was changing, too. The Carnaby Street look emerged in fashion. The Who played at the Marquee Club, and pop music became the soundtrack to a swinging New Britain. Even seaside towns were catching the fever, with resorts like Brighton becoming known for their music venues. It was a sound that gave a name to a generation, and wherever you were in Britain, you couldn't escape it. And that brings me to the thing that I love most about this story. If you want to know what it was like to live through the British invasion, you don't need to rely on what I tell you or anyone else tells you. You can hear it for yourself. It's right here. All you have to do is put on a record and lean back. The Beatles chords still act as small time machines. A single note can return someone to a first kiss, a gray pavement, or the bright sill of a record shop window. Their legacy is both tender and complicated. Creative brilliance that changed taste, commercial waves that remade industry, and a cultural courage that taught many young people they could be seen and heard. The smell of old paperbacks, the chatter outside coffee bars, and the memory of cigarette-lit evenings are honest markers of a time that taught Britain how to feel new possibilities. But not everyone was happy. The Beatles faced hostility, sometimes for what they wore, sometimes for what they sang, and sometimes for simply being famous. For many people, it didn't matter what they did. They would always be those mop-top boys from Liverpool. And of course, not every teenager in Britain loved them either. Some thought they were just a bit silly. A teenage girl writes, "My sister and I hate them. All our friends are mad about them, but we just don't like their music. They look funny with that hair of theirs. They're funny looking altogether. I wish people would stop going mad about them." John Lennon knew that some people didn't like him and his band. But he didn't care because he knew what they represented, a chance for a better world. After all, it was John who sang, "All you need is love," and love is what the Beatles gave. They showed us that it was okay to be ourselves and to love the music we loved. And above all, they gave us hope. If you remember a time when you heard a Beatles song for the first time, please tell me in the comments. Over the years, the Beatles changed. They grew and evolved and matured, just as we all do. Their early hits may have been written by John and Paul, but later albums like SGT, Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band were a work of art. And then they went to the movies. A Hard Day's Night captured their energy, and although it wasn't a great film, it was a great soundtrack. They followed that with Help, and then, in 1966, they shocked the world by saying they were giving up touring. And then there was the White Album. And then, of course, there was Abbey Road. Then it was over. The band split up in 1970, and in 1980, John Lennon was tragically killed outside his New York home. The world mourned, and although the other Beatles went on to successful solo careers, nothing was ever quite the same again. George Harrison died in 2001, but Paul McCartney is still with us and still making music. If you want to know what the British invasion sounded like, listen to this. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. Now close your eyes and imagine that you're walking down the street and suddenly the opening chords of She Loves You drift out of an open doorway. What do? You stop and you listen, and then you start to dance. The British invasion was more than just a TV show. It was a revolution. It was a chance for a new generation to express itself, and the rest is history. If any detail in these stories feels wrong to you, I apologize. Everyone's high street and bedroom radio had its own colors. But if this journey moved you, please press like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you won't miss our next look back. Share your Beatles memories in the comments below. I read everyone, and they help keep history alive. Thank you so much for watching. This has been our look back at the British invasion. Join us next time for more adventures through history.